You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The views expressed by the individuals during this broadcast are their own opinions, and they may not be the same as those of their group or other organizations they may be involved with.
All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us for our V.A.C. Roundtable, number 42. We are joined today by Perry Parks, who is a Vietnam veteran and also a gentleman who we have a great deal of respect for. He is out of the South, as we know, out of the Carolinas. And we would like to thank him for joining us tonight. And as we are now officially live, thank you everybody for joining us. I would like to thank our council members, Tony Landry, Wade Laughter, Pearson Kennedy Crosby, Al Byrne, George Armstrong, Michael Krawitz, and Nate Landau for joining us tonight. We, of course, are joined by Perry Parks, who is our guest tonight. And he is a Vietnam veteran who is going to speak to us about his experiences. So, at this time, Mr. Perry Parks, thank you for joining us. Unmute yourself. You're ready to go there. And our first question to you is, what got you into cannabis? At what age? What was your first memory? And what made you realize this was going to be your calling?
Well, I was fortunately introduced to cannabis back in 1961 as a bandsman in an army band. In 1966, I learned about flight school, and it was through a person at a sport parachute league, Dick Fortenberry, who was the world champion parachutist. And I saw this funny uniform, WOC, on his collar, and I said, Dick, what is that WOC? He said, I'm a one-officer candidate. I'm in flight school at Fort Rucker. And I said, my goodness, how did you do that? So he told me you have to apply. So I applied in 1965 in December, left for Fort Walters, Texas. I spent about 4 to 5 months there, and then I went to Fort Rucker, Alabama, where I was transitioning to the UH-1 helicopter. From there, I was sent to Vietnam, surprise. That was the cost of flight school. And for somebody who really wants to fly, it was a decent cost. Okay, I went to Vietnam. I spent 1 year in an assault helicopter company. I came back to Fort Rucker, and I was chosen to teach at Fort Rucker. I taught there for a year or two. And then I went back to Vietnam as a helicopter and a Cobra instructor. And I went to the stand board, had my own helicopters. I actually had some stories that are just almost incredible, because I had a first cousin that I grew up with. He had been drafted, so he was about 5 miles from me in Vietnam. When I came home and was basically stir crazy, I drifted around for about 5 years. I guess you could call it homeless, even though I didn't think of myself as being homeless. I did not have a home address permanent. Then I got back into flying with the Bell Helicopter Company in Iran. And so I went and taught Iranian military students for about a year. And then I came back to the States. I've always been involved in the church, even though I took a long period away from it. But I'm going to church every week, and when I finally turned 60 and was no longer going to be in the National Guard and was no longer being drug tested, someone told me that cannabis would provide some of the relief that I was getting through pills. And I thought, well, that's worth a try. I was shocked at how well it worked. And the more I thought about it, as a Christian seeking the truth, then I should be telling other people about this. I'm, at least for me, it worked. And so I went to the pastor and I said, look, this actually works for me, and it's been uh, mislabeled and mistaught and misrepresented for years now. And so when I really got interested, I learned about patients at a time with Alan and Ed. And so I went to a medical conference in 2009, I believe, or 8, at Rhode Island, where I met Dr. Mishula. And I also saw a presentation by a doctor who told me why I received the relief that I got through cannabis. When I saw the medical documentation of how it worked and how well it worked, I thought, well, I went to my pastor and said, look, I just have to tell people about this because we're all seeking the truth, and this is the truth. Well, he was very upset. He said, well, you're going to involve our church, you're going to involve your daughter at the high school, you're going to involve your family. And I said, look, if I'm involving them in the truth, then I'm doing an honorable thing. And so I basically came out to the local newspaper and told them that this is what I did instead of the cannabis. And of course, I continued to go to the Patients Out of Time conferences. And the more I learned, the more upset I got at the disinformation about cannabis that was being put out. And so I got more involved. I met Michael Krowitz, and I'm assuming Michael is on tonight. And I have to tell you that in my many years of just kind of kicking around, very few people come to my house and make me be quiet for 24 hours. And I was absolutely astounded at Michael's knowledge of cannabis and the medical properties and the history of cannabis. And so I realized that all this time when I thought that I was a educated cannabis consumer, I was basically ignorant. And that is the state that we find people in today. I often tell people here, and I've told the local newspaper finally got really ready to help me. And so they became a partner instead of a stumbling block. And so with the help of the local newspaper, we were able to change minds and to actually work with the Richmond County Daily Journal, which received an annual award for broadcasting for tackling this subject, which is so taboo in North Carolina. I have to tell you that today I'm somewhat disappointed that North Carolina continues to be a state where cannabis use is illegal. They have made a carve out for me, kind of. I mean, they really don't bother me about it because they basically think I've earned the right to choose my personal form of medication. But it is so sad because other people are not afforded that same courtesy or that same acceptance. And so, having worked this time, I worked through the State Employees Association to try to convince them and try to convince the people. And Michael was, I was blessed. He attended a meeting with me with the North Carolina State Employees Association, and that's about 500 of the hard workers in the state. And we actually passed a resolution in support of cannabis legalization. We were the second highest priority behind health care in the state of North Carolina. And we had a joyous celebration of having come on board to support cannabis legalization. I went to the Speaker of the House at that time, Joe Hackney, and I said, Joe, look, wouldn't it be nice if we put our farmers back to work growing a plant that cures cannabis rather than one that causes it? And I looked now and I actually emailed I emailed the former speaker just a few days, and I said, "Don't you wish you had listened a little closer to me instead of just writing me off as another hothead?" And so it's been a long battle. Uh, I have continued to be disappointed, and I want to tell you that just this past week, I went to a political fundraiser in a kind of a educational tour by Honorable Sherry Beasley. Sherry Beasley is the Democratic candidate for the U.S. Senate in North Carolina. And I am happy to say she's getting a lot of positive publicity. And so in that meeting, which was close to a room full with local press, I stood up and asked a question. I said, Honorable Beasley, I said, I'm a former military helicopter pilot who chose cannabis to treat my PTSD, and I continue to be considered a criminal in this state. And I was so impressed with her because not only did people in the audience come back in support of me, but she said, look, I support the legalization of cannabis. I mean the legalization, not only for medical cannabis, but for recreational use also. This is the first person candidate for the U.S. Senate in North Carolina who has openly supported the use of cannabis for everybody. And so I am throwing my full support behind her. I hope we as a veterans organization may even find some way to encourage her. She's getting positive press. And the newspaper reported her response to my cannabis question. And so I am excited in North Carolina for the first time. And I've been doing this for about, what, Michael, 12, 15 years, 20 years. Anyway, that's that's where we're at. That's how I got involved, and it's the right thing. That's why I'm here.
Right on, Perry. I was wondering if maybe you could turn up your sound a little bit. You're just a little low, so if you can turn up your volume just a little bit for your microphone, that would be helpful. Michael Crowitz has a follow-up on that initial right there. So, Councilmember Crowitz, you're recognized.
Thank you, Etienne. It's great to see you, Perry. It really is, and thanks for thinking of me. Yeah, of course I'm here. I wouldn't miss it for the world. But I got a couple quick follow-ups. One, test your, I guess, your memory here. I'm not trying to test your memory, but I just want you to, I think you probably remember this. So you got up there at the Democratic convention meeting, and you had a quote that it wasn't really a quote. It's just something that you said basically about Barry McCaffrey and about your communications with Barry McCaffrey about this and why that should compel them to think about this. That was the first part, if you can remember that. And then the second part was just a bit about like where religion comes into this, because you actually were and are a great champion of this is a moral cause, the access to medicine for cannabis, and that struck me just from your genuineness and your kind of hard work on that side. So those two were my quick follow-up.
Well, I don't remember a lot about Barry McCaffrey. I mean, I know who he is, and I remember his stance on cannabis, but I don't remember the particular event. But that's not surprising to me, Michael. The second part of your question had to do with. I'm sorry. I am fully medicated.
Well, here, let me I'll refresh your memory on the second one. While I didn't want to say it myself because I was afraid to misquote it. I remember you saying something about Barry McCaffrey, that you went up to him and you said, hey, we should have access for our cannabis for our veterans. And he said, well, come back and show us the research. And you came back with the research and you said, here's the bloody research, but you know what? You should have taken my word for it. And just the way that you said that to those folks, and it was like, what the hell? Are we really going to just look a veteran in the face who's right here suffering and getting a benefit and say, well, no, I don't believe you? And I think you called that maybe better than anybody I've ever seen in that moment. And then the other question was just about religion. I was asking you, sort of how and where you saw this as sort of a religious calling. You didn't kind of hit on that part of the question.
Yeah, well, first of all, I remember now what you were talking about because we had the entire State Employees Association membership in an auditorium, and I just told them, I said, look, when I first told you I was doing this, you said, look, show us your evidence. And so, after going to a couple of the seminars with patients at a time, I was able to present the evidence of why cannabis worked in my case. I said, but the sad thing is, everybody comes in all the time saying, thank you for your service, thank you for your service. Look, why don't you just stop arresting me and allow me to treat my cannabis or to treat my PTSD the way that I want to? Because I was taking a sleeping pill, I was taking narcotics, I was taking, not narcotics, but, all kinds of medications to calm me down when all I had to do was just kind of sit back with a joint and smoke it and be relieved. I mean, it was a way of reprocessing memories from what I remember at the Patients Out of Town conference. They said, for some reason we don't understand exactly how it works, but the memories that keep you awake at night and that cause you problems somehow are processed differently and are not threatening. And so the amount of relief that I got was so earth shattering. And to look at other veterans and see how they were suffering, I actually made a presentation to the American Legion in Washington in the Rayburn office building, and it was full of old veterans. But the problem is, if you're part of the older group, you have been conditioned with government money for years that this is a horrible thing. And so the first time a veteran stands up and says, hey, it's not what you think, because it really does work, the first thing they do when you mention the word marijuana and cannabis is their brain wants to shut down. And they basically say anything he says after this is a lie. And that's the sad part, because only veterans talking to other veterans who have that understanding that, hey, I want to help you because I know what it's like to lose that. And that help has been so, it's been a lifesaver. I can say that. My life now is far better. And I no longer hold it back. I mean, I'm not trying to throw it up in their face, but I have earned the right to treat my illness the way that I see fit best for me. And so I hope that people will kind of let their guard down a little bit and say, well, what if what he's saying is true? Then what then? There are plenty of opportunities to help veterans with doing this. And anyway, good to see you, Michael.
All right. With that, thank you very much. Our next question will be from Councilmember Wade Laughter. Councilmember Laughter.
Thank you, Jen and Perry. It's a real pleasure to meet you. I was struck by the timing as you were telling your story. You first described your first tour in Vietnam, mid 60s, I think you said. And then you did another tour after some couple years in the States. And then it sounded like you had time at home where you started talking to your pastor about cannabis, or maybe you started talking about your PTSD, but at some point cannabis started becoming important to you. And you might have really already answered my question. I was really interested in what drives a person to be an activist in the way that you have. You've spoken for justice, you've spoken for the plant, you've spoken for people's right to have access to a plant. And yet you risked your standing in your community, in your church. I'm sure some folks in your church called your faith into question. And anyway, can you talk about that for a minute, please? And thank you for showing up with us here today.
Yeah, you bet. Listen, it's a pleasure. My wife and I were denied membership at a church for over 2 years because of the legality of what I was doing. It was not whether they thought I was right or wrong. It was like technically you're opposed to the law. And you know, in the church, we're taught to obey the laws. But it's just like an order that the Lieutenant Calley had. When they give you the order, they're giving that order based on information they have. If their information is not correct, then they could give you an order which is not right. And it's really a damned if you do, a damned if you don't. On the military officer, you have to decide whether it's right or wrong, and then you have to do what you think is right. And so, whenever I realized that this was right for me, then it became imperative that I say it. I know most people were educated right out of high school. I went to college much later, and when I first excuse me, heard about Martin Luther King and he was talking about justice, he said something that's truly earth-shattering. He said, "Listen, if you recognize an injustice, and when I say that, I mean you have to really recognize it for you. You have to realize this is really wrong. When you recognize that injustice, if you don't do something to try and correct or to make it better, then you, if you'll pardon me, you lose some of your authority for being a human, for having a brain, because allowing injustice to exist anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And of course, today, I think most people can see that based on the current legal situations that the former president is stepping in. And it's not about politics. It's about a person's health, their mental health, their physical health, and the combination of both of those, and the fact that it can provide you with help to fight today's maladies. And there are enough of them for everybody. Anyway.
All right. With our next question will be Pearson Kennedy Crosby, Councilmember Crosby, in Alaska.
Hey, first off, welcome back. I know a lot of y'all didn't get that, and hopefully I'm not the first one to say it to you. And myself and the council absolutely appreciate your time. So I'm an Iraq combat veteran, and I know we served in 2 different wars, but I'm sure there's a lot of things that could be seen as hell on earth, and that we've both had to experience similar, or not similarly, but different types of that type of tragedy. My question is, when did you feel that you realized the potential of the transformation that occurred, the transformation that occurred when it came to your health with medical cannabis, or cannabis in general, that helped you heal from your war experiences?
Well, I went I believe in about 1995, I went to a war protest in Fayetteville. And one of the protesters for not patients out of time was the activist organization against war. And so when I stopped by their bus and it said Veterans for Peace, VFP, I thought, well, this is really strange because in my 30 months in Vietnam, I remember I remember flying one time over the jungle, and a guy's down here with a rifle shooting at me in the helicopter. And I'm looking at from purely the war perspective. He's not firing at me because he has something against me. He's firing at me because somebody somewhere told him to come down here and kill me. And by the same token, I don't really want to see something bad happen to him. But you see, there's a thing in war when you see your friend killed or shot or injured, it becomes kind of a reaction to that. It's I don't know what you call it, but it's revenge. And so that revenge, if you're not careful, can take over your whole personality and kind of warp you for a while. And so when I came to that thing that I saw a poster that said, "What if they gave a war and nobody came?" And I thought, well, that's really odd, but guess what? Sometimes that happens. And so whenever I mean, it's not happened yet, but if they did do it and everybody refused to fight, how do you conduct a war? So anyway, at that meeting, there were a couple of people with cameras from the Out of Loop Productions, and they said, we're working on what we call the Veterans Film Project, and we were listening to you speak, and we wanted to see if you would like to be part of it. Well, I did not know anything about what they were talking about. This is basically with Veterans for Peace. And so they came to Rockingham and actually filmed me and questioned me and did a documentary. And then later on, I took them to Wallace, North Carolina, Rose Hill, and the boss was generous enough to let me use the helicopter. So we flew around eastern North Carolina for a bit in a civilian helicopter. Well, that movie became, when they finally titled it, The Good Soldier. And so we started doing film festivals around the country and presenting the film and then answering questions afterwards. And then after the film had been out for a while, we went to Long Island and met some famous people and Sharon Stone and people like that. And then it played on, Bill Moyers bought the rights to the film itself. And he disassembled the film and put it back together. And the sad thing is he left one soldier out. There were 5 soldiers from World War II, from Vietnam, and from the Gulf War. And so they asked what happened before we went in service, while we were in service, and then after we got out. And so that was basically the story. But we actually went to New York with Bill Moyers and his wife, Judy. And the film was nominated in the historical format program. And it actually won the Emmy Award for long-form historical program. And that was quite an honor to be with Michael and Lexi Lovell and to meet a lot of people that I have a lot of respect for. But in the process of doing all this, I met so many really incredible people, Al and Jim and Michael, and you begin to see that this battle, which has been going for 20 or 30 years now, it's coming to a close in not the best of ways. And when I say that, I mean a lot of the people who poured their life and heart and soul into making this medication available to everybody are being sidelined by the big money, the tobacco companies and other people. And of course, that's a different story. But I am proud to say that when I told my pastor that I felt like it was my obligation to tell the truth, then I followed my precept, and I have really uh, benefited from it, from all the people I've met, and this crew here. I mean, we all know there's veterans all over the place who don't yet have the freedom to use cannabis. I mean, you can use it, but it's always at your own risk if you're in one of the few states that are left. When I started, there were 12 states that had some cannabis laws on the books, and we've come a long way. And I think a lot of that is due to people like Michael and Emil and Al and all the rest of you. I mean, so many of you I don't even know anymore. But it's been a pleasure for me.
Thank you, Perry. Pearson, you had a follow-up?
Yes, and thank you. More of a comment and a well wishes, I guess. So last question, you referred to the excuse me, something that reminded me of Thomas Jefferson, where he said, "If a law is unjust, it is not only your duty or right, or it is not only your right, but your duty to disobey it, or if it's tyrannical." And I just wanted to end it with thank you for being here and God bless.
Well, I really appreciate it. And look, I know you guys focused on me tonight, but there's no one on this screen. Excuse me. No one on the screen I see that has not had a major part in coming to where we are today. And we still have a ways to go. One of the things that Bruce Barcott, who did the Time magazine article, one of the things he said was, enough with the stigma, enough with the putting people down, because it's out of ignorance. And so whenever I read in the back of the magazine that I had some part in changing his attitude towards medical cannabis, that was reward enough for everything. And Michael, I mean, of course, I know everybody here knows what he's done, and the years he's put in. When I first got Michael first came to my house, he said, "I've been doing this about 12 years." I thought, well, that is a lifetime. And now I see that time goes by. I mean, anyway, it's been a real pleasure here to speak with everybody and to reminisce and whatever else we do. And one of the nicest pictures, I think, besides when Obama came over and shook my hand, one of the things I enjoyed the most was the Washington Post photograph of us veterans throwing our pill bottles in a pile. And so whenever we did that, somebody from the Washington Post got a picture of me leaning over, and they captioned it, "Perry Parks throws one of his pill bottles." What they didn't really know, and what I told the local paper later on, and they straightened it out, was I had a little small cylinder with a couple of joints in it, which is my daily medication. And I accidentally threw it on that pile, and so I was actually retrieving my medication rather than throwing it away. And then that photograph's been shown several times. So.
Well, sometimes it's just about being in the right place at the right time,
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to bring up Council Member Michael Crowitz for our next question.
Thank you, Etienne. Find the mute button there.
My hero.
What number question am I doing, Etienne? I thought you said 4.
I just sent it to you. It's right there, number
Okay.
number 4.
Yeah, you did say 4. Okay. All right. So what comment on that? Yeah, well, we kind of already talked about the documentary. Let me change this question a little bit and ask you, to reminisce for a second about something that I found extraordinary. Another aspect of interest around the country and even around the world for Perry's cannabis, mission has been around, being a person who's considered a mature adult instead of, the caricature of a young person at a rally smoking a joint, or a teenager, preferably for the media. In the old days, they hunt down the youngest person they could find. And here was someone who's, grandfather age. And you fill in the details for us if you could, but there was a moment where he was asked by a writer to use his cannabis the way that he normally would use his cannabis. So he broke out a bong and ripped a big bong hit. And I guess they really didn't expect that. They kind of tickled them. They took good pictures of it. And that bong hit, I've termed the bong hit heard around the world. I don't know how many reprints of it there were, but it was certainly what you would call viral in today's lingo. And it definitely was covered by media all over the world. But anything you want to say about the detail of the bong hit heard around the world?
That was a very interesting event, because what happened was Miami Herald was doing a story about senior people, old adults that are 60 and 70 using cannabis. And so the Miami Herald called me and said, "Look, would you be willing to participate in this article?" I said, "Well, certainly." And so they started asking me, and I told them I did a bong every now and then. They said, "Oh, my goodness." The Associated Press comment said, "Would you be willing to actually let us film you taking a bong?" I said, "Absolutely." Well, I called our lawyer, Ben Scales, in Asheville, and I said, "Ben, listen, the Associated Press wants to photograph me smoking a bong. What do you think?" He said, "Well, to be honest, it could be considered probable cause. But then again, they don't know what you're smoking." I said, "Well, I think I'm going to do it anyway." He said, "Well, I'll be right there if you need me." And so they sent the photographer up. Actually, sent photographers up 2 days in a row. The first time with a still camera, the second time with a projector movie camera. And so that photograph of me smoking the bong actually showed up in almost every. It was in Japanese. It was Hispanic. It was Spanish. It was in. I'm just several different places. Some people said for the one night, it was in over 100 newspapers worldwide. And so I always called it the bong hit heard around the world, because so many people. It was funny to see the photograph and see all the different languages talking about these old people smoking pot. And they called me old then. I was 60. Man, that was nothing. But it was a lot of fun, and brought back a lot of memories. It didn't take a lot to excite people. Unless you're willing to go to a state where it's illegal and let them photograph it. And of course, later on, Channel 5 uh, actually did a story, and we actually did it live on TV where I took my bong out and took a hit, and we talked about it. And they also had a story on the young girl who was using cannabis for her point blank for her disorder, whatever it was. But she was basically paralyzed. It was quite a help to her, and it made a big splash at the time. It was one of the earlier stories that really started the ball rolling in Canada.
Thank you again, Perry. Next up, we kind of covered this question a little bit, but I think Tony's going to emboss on this one a little bit. Councilmember Landry, and then we've got a follow-up from Councilmember Byrne.
First of all, it's an honor to meet you, Perry. And I pulled up an article on you from yourdailyjournal.com. It's showing that you've been, and now I'm picking up now that I know the story, I can see the little medication tube there that you have in your hand. That's interesting. Yeah, we have Family Forum in Louisiana that's very opposition to cannabis reform, drug policy reform, and it's a religious-based group. And I know you talked about your faith, and I was wondering, how does your faith work influence your advocacy? Does that help your advocacy out because of your faith, your position in faith, or you missed that?
In most cases, if you're talking about funding, one of the sources of my wife and I's discovery was, how much does this pay? It didn't really pay a lot, but I have been fortunate enough to travel around the country speaking for the veterans and for the cannabis use. And so many people you meet, like you can't talk about cannabis. And so harm reduction became the new buzzword for talking about cannabis. Because everybody was working to reduce the harm from the use of cannabis and other drugs. And I met so many people who have been crippled or stunned when they actually came out and told the truth about their cannabis use. And so I have been fortunate that I have not suffered any bad results. I have been fortunate that people have been willing to listen, because that's what it takes, is for people to stop and listen and to not write you off right away. And I was fortunate in that way because my life story was one where I was often somewhat in the spotlight, and being able to marry cannabis with the spotlight. Some people get away with it, but a lot of people get in trouble. And that's one of the things that when I was talking to people at the North Carolina legislature, I one day went in and didn't know that I had a small amount of cannabis in my military uniform coat pocket. And everybody said, "You smell so strong." And I was with a doctor and his wife. And I said, "Look, I knew I was clean, so I didn't worry about it." So they stopped me and took me into a room and asked me to unbutton my coat and almost seemed embarrassed to kind of halfway search me down. And so when I got outside that day and found out I actually had some uh, contraband in my pocket, I was shocked. But the thing of it was, the the people, when I went back to the representative's office, I said, you know, what really disturbs me, if this had been some black teenager or some Mexican or some person who's always taken a hard road, then they wouldn't have treated him that way. They would have. It's just sad. It's not right. So, but I really appreciate everything that Michael and the rest of you guys have done to get the word out and to make us look more like we are than what people thought we were.
Thank you, Perry, very much. So that's basically it for our questions. Al Byrne, who is one of our members, has a question to follow up.
Yeah, well, Perry, I'm glad we finally put it together tonight. Just a few phone calls, but good to see you. You're looking better than the last time we had you on. You had COVID, I think, at that time. And so, I'm also glad Mike brought up the blonde hit around the world, because all of us, somebody said, desire at least to expect 15 minutes of fame, and you had yours. So congratulations. One thing I'd like you to talk about is North Carolina, in particular the politics. You brought up that the ex-Supreme Court judge, I believe her name is looking good in North Carolina. He's also medical and legal cannabis. I think veterans in North Carolina would like to know that. So I got a two-point question here, Terry. Is there any organization veteran-orientated, politically veteran-orientated in North Carolina that we could speak with about this? And the second question is, in every state I've ever dealt with this shit, there's a good person, Mrs. Beasley, Miss Beasley, and then there's the bad guy. Who's the bad guy? I would like to know the bad guy's name so that, like we always do, it works pretty good, man. Trust me. We invite him on the radio show and ask him why he's not supporting vets in North Carolina. And one of two things happen. Overnight, they either just start supporting vets or we never hear from them again. But who's the bad guy? And are there some groups that we all can, for the moment, back this lady in her beliefs that we believe in? She's going to be a senator. Hell, man, that's what we want. Thank you.
Al, what was the first question?
Al, what was the first question?
All right. Well, first I tried to make a joke. That didn't go over too big. But I was saying, who's the bad guy in North Carolina? There's a good lady, and there's always the bad guy. We want to identify the bad guy as on air here, so we all know who he is, because that's what we do. And then the second question is there a North Carolina veteran group that we could get interested in this particular election?
Well, we have two senators in North Carolina, Burr and Tillis. Tillis was a former Speaker of the House. I've been with him at town hall meetings. He has been kind enough to let me use the mic. But once he got to Washington as a U.S. Senator, he forgot North Carolina. I've called him many times and said, look, what can you do about cannabis? And he rarely did anything at all. And so we've always had Republican opposition to cannabis legalization in North Carolina. That's why we don't have cannabis. We had 14 Democratic sponsors for 2 or 3 of the cannabis bills in North Carolina. And with those 14, Democrats, we could never get the Republicans on board. And so every time we had one education day where we had people from all over the state with all sorts of crutches and maladies and problems, and yet we had a person from North Carolina who belonged to the Christian political action group, and he was just totally uneducated about cannabis, and so they fought us at every spot, and it was not based on science; it's based on their old, and I don't even remember his name now, but he was a Republican activist who wanted to keep us away from cannabis, to keep us as criminals. And so I really had a hard time. I told him one time I saw him coming out of the elevator. I said, the Holy Spirit, which most of us Christians seem to have inside of us, would tell you, if you would open your eyes and look, that this can't be wrong. This has none of the side effects that you talk about are real. We've had so many of them with the early days. And I just told him, I said, look, you should pray about this earnestly, because we're all seeking the truth, but you refuse to let the truth come through. And so it's been that way in this state for at least since the last 14, 15 years. And I'm hoping that with this new Cheryl Beasley, who has come out openly and said she supports cannabis legalization, and she has a good chance of going to the North Carolina State Senate. And I just hope she takes Justin Burr's seat. Burr was a bail bondsman, and so when we had a meeting, and Burr was he was basically the chairperson. I said, look, do you have a conflict of interest here? What percentage of your bail bonds are for cannabis offenses? They didn't see that as any kind of. I reported it to the ethics committee, and they saw it as no conflict of interest. So, but North Carolina is slowly changing, and I used to say we would probably do 50 unless they add a new state. Then we'd do 51. But I'm hoping that we have a change with Sherry Beasley. She's a former she's a former Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court, and she's generating a lot of positive publicity, and she's visiting a lot of the local districts. And so if you're in North Carolina and you see Sherry Beasley, she is for you if you're a cannabis user.
Well, thank you, Perry. I think that that about wraps it up for our questions tonight. So we would like to once again thank Perry Parks for joining us tonight. And it's been an honor to share this time with you. And thank you again for your years of activism and your hard work. And as Pearson said earlier, thank you and welcome home. I am a Desert Storm veteran, so I thank your generation for very much taking our generation under its wing and making sure that we had our heads screwed on straight. So forever thankful for that. Well, thank you, everybody. We'd like to thank Perry Parks. I'd like to thank Tony Landry, Wade Laughter, Al Byrne, Michael Crowitz, George Armstrong, and Nate Landau for joining us tonight. This has been V.A.C. Roundtable number 42, Mr. Perry Parks. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great night.
The Veterans Action Council is a Pace Radio Network content provider. You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The opinions of the individuals during this broadcast are their own, and may not be the opinions of their group or other organizations they may be involved with. All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
Enjoy the buzz of legalization with Campbellford Lifestyle Shop. From lights to plant nutrients, books, consumption accessories, and more, we've got all your basics to grow or consume cannabis. Visit our info center or take a look at our piercing services and body jewelry, now available in-store through Campbellford Lifestyle Shop, 17 Bridge Street West, Campbellford.
Limestone City Hydroponics is Kingston, Ontario's hydroponics shop. Take your growing to the next level and create the optimal environment with a tent kit, or maximize your yield with an ebb and flow flood table kit. Either way, Limestone City Hydroponics has more sizes and options to fit your needs. Are you looking for the power of the sun that adapts to your budget? Then look no further, as they have professional grow lighting. They have indoor grow systems that are easy and cost effective, with many options to fit your living space and lifestyle. Cultivate your growing potential. We have everything you need to succeed. And if you can't make it to the store, they offer local delivery to the greater Kingston area. Remember, when you're looking for experts to help you grow, then look no further than the locally owned Limestone City Hydroponics, 105 Sunderland Drive in Kingston, Ontario. Call them at 613-548-0420. We are people advocating cannabis education here at Pace Radio.